privilege of witnessing the birth of Kentlands 25 years ago, as did many in the room. And I'm joining you today to host the retrospective TED panel entitled, quote, Kentlands Looking Back. Our three panelists, all of whom I've known for a long time, will remind us of the past, the challenges endured, the problems resolved, and interestingly, perhaps, the roads not taken. To raise your knowledge level and enhance your understanding of the dynamics of the day, we have these three esteemed panelists whose roles in the charette and in the development of Kentlands were crucial. And since you're in receipt of the bios, and as I told you about the solemn oath last night amongst the moderators to not read the bios, I told them I would use only 10 kind words to describe each of them to you. And I went a little bit over, but not much. Our first speaker will be Steve Wilcox, ultimately a builder at Kentlands with Parkwood Homes, who worked originally for Joseph Alfandre and Company. Our next speaker will be Mike Watkins, who everybody knows, of course, the original town architect at Kentlands under the aegis of DPZ. He was the idea guy. Jeff Campbell, representing Chevy Chase Bank, roughly disguised at the time as Great Seneca Land Company. Ultimate savior of Kentlands and the Neo Forum at the very strong urging of Mayor Boher. At the conclusion of the three presentations, of course, we will have time for questions that will be directed to the speakers and perhaps some interactive discussion. We'll begin with Mr. Wilcox. Steve?
Thank you, Jennifer. Which one are we working with here? Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be part of this. Last night was a terrific event, and I very much appreciate the efforts of everyone who's been involved in structuring and organizing and reorganizing all of these activities. It's been very well done. Thank you. And listening to Daniel Alfandre last night, who's Joe's son, receiving the Founder Award for his dad, made me think how old we are and how much has changed. It was 25 years ago. It was a long time ago. Daniel looks just like Joe did back then. Yeah. I'm going to get this thing out of the way. And I think it's important to realize that when we started all this, Joe was a young guy. He was in his mid-30s. He had a family, a large family. He was a third-generation builder, as Daniel said. He had started his own company, I don't know, 7 or 8 years prior to that. He had been very successful with some very nice neighborhoods, Saybrook Village in Gaithersburg and part of Washingtonian Woods in Gaithersburg, amongst a couple of others. Had great architecture, and had been, I think, felt at that point that he was kind of approaching financial security and feeling comfortable about his family and that side of life. And Kentlands was just a much bigger project. It was a big change and a very big risk, obviously. At the time, there were a few other very good locations here in suburban Maryland. There was the Crown Farm, there was the King Farm over on 355, there was the Thomas and the Banks Farm. Kentlands was, we felt, the best piece of ground. It was, first it was in the city, which was crucial in terms of getting things done. And second, it was clearly a charismatic piece of ground, and I think all of us recognize that. And I was thinking when Leon was talking just a minute ago, there aren't very many times, and I'm a developer, but there aren't very many times that I think we look at a piece of beautiful ground the way Kentlands was, and then look at what happened in the development and feel like this didn't make it any worse. And I think that's a real compliment to the way the community was built out. It really is a beautiful place. It was a very beautiful farm at the time that it was acquired. I want to keep track of time here. So at this point, when Joe was approaching putting the property under contract, he asked me and Candy McCracken and Billy Winburn to join him. He was also, at the time, he had Sue Whalen and Rob Talbert working for him, and we started into the project. At the time, Washington was a pretty good place for large project development. Reston and Columbia had good reputations and were well regarded. Joe wanted to do something different. He wanted to develop something more like what he grew up with in Bethesda. We met with and worked with two very good land planning firms here in the area. They gave us initial designs. They were followed kind of the protocol of the time. There was a bay for small townhouses. There was a bay for large townhouses. We called them bays, which isn't a very nice word, is it? But anyhow, there was a section for small single-family homes, and there was a section for large single-family homes. Everything was segregated. Everything was separated by the road network that served each section, and nobody felt great about it. And then, as has been mentioned, David Wolf, who was our community association consultant, was talking with us and said, "You guys ought to get in touch with Andres Duany." And we thought, well, why not? So we called, and Andres after we described the project, his first question was, "How old are you guys?" And it's like, I mean, why does that matter? And he says, "I really don't trust people over 40. And at the time, I would barely made that cut. Joe at least had a little bit of room, but it was a great initial relationship. He came up, looked at the ground, looked at the project, suggested that we all go to London together to look at urban forms and to look at buildings and to look at streets and hopefully meet with Leon Creer, who was sort of a godfather of new urbanism at the time. It was a great trip that established a lot of trust and good working relationship between the two organizations. At that point, we were able to move ahead. I don't want to skip this. It was one of the things that was really important with Andres' role was to, we had a situation where we couldn't close on this ground until we had a master plan approved, which was almost impossible. As Jennifer said last night, the city had to jump through all kinds of hoops to make that happen. And it was just an I've never seen, I think it may never happen again, constellation of events to have Ed Boher and DPZ and Joe Alfandre together at that time to make that happen. The city really came through. The last major player I want to mention, Jeff is sitting right here, was the BF Salt Company, Chevy Chase Bank. There were a number of prominent lenders at the time who were willing to finance the project, all of them kind of roughly the same terms. As things ultimately played out, it was a great decision to go with Chevy Chase Bank. I don't think any other lender understood real estate as well. I don't think any other lender would have stayed with the project the way that Chevy Chase did. I think the typical approach other banks were using at the time was carve it up, sell off pieces, and get out if they had to take back a project. And through a lot of maybe unfair criticism, I think Jeff and Chevy Chase Bank really came through and were crucial in Kentlands working out as it did. The charette was great, exciting, productive. In addition to DPZ and city officials, there were all the people from our firm, there were a number of consultants, there were neighbors, and we had some very skeptical retail developers and home builders that we needed to be working with there. But all of us were very enthused, and all of the post-charette publicity was obviously very encouraging. Still, there were significant risks involved. Joe was personally guaranteeing a $63 million loan, which meant way more than everything he had at the time. I didn't realize how sobering and weighty this kind of thing is until I started my own company several years later and had to sign personal guarantees that said, look, everything you've got, they can take if this doesn't work. Everything financial that you have and everything that you've worked for and all of your career is on the line. It requires some introspection and reflection. It requires great deal of commitment to the project, and it's very different from working for someone else. I didn't understand at the time what Joe did, how much that meant, and how much that cost, ultimately. The city had different set of risks. They had to buy into changes most jurisdictions didn't allow then and still don't allow. And I think all of the issues with narrower streets and turning radii and setbacks and all of the things that Sydney mentioned still are big issues. And there aren't very many places that are that creative and flexible and willing to do it. And that was a great big risk. And I see now in projects that I'm working on in other parts of the country, they don't want to risk doing anything different from the normal streets because they don't want to have any criticism if there ever is a huge fire engine that can't go down with cars parked on each side of the street and do a U-turn in the street or whatever they want them to do. So that was a big deal. And it still sets, I think, the city apart from other jurisdictions in the country. With Joe, the financial and market risks and the bank ultimately, were very significant. A project this big typically goes through at least one down cycle. Nobody anticipated a recession as bad as we had in the early 90s, but you have to kind of assume those things can happen. But we were adding design and plan innovations that we had to convince builders and retailers of. A lot of this stuff is mainstream today. Back then, it wasn't at all. So when we started telling builders about front porches and you have to use cedar shake and you can't use vinyl siding and you have these pulling the house all the way up the street, and probably maybe the most significant, we're going to mix townhouses and single family homes and large homes and small homes and all the price points in one neighborhood and one block. That was a big deal and a big challenge to everyone. And as I say, it still is in most communities. Having the garages in the alleys. Back then, alleys, at least in my mind, it was like that's where trash is and little kids do delinquent things that you kind of don't want to have in a community. And so it seemed risky. I know the Simon Company was shocked when Liz and Andres suggested housing on top of the mall. And they're saying, what if the plumbing backs up and you've got the Polo store down below? And we can't do that. It's done now. I mean, we see it all over the country. But at the time, it was like, that is impossible and it'll never happen. So today, Kentlands is an example for architects and planners all over the country. My company has been building in Denver for the last 10 years because the city of Denver said to potential developers when they closed the old airport and started the reuse, they wanted it to look like Kentlands. And all of the potential developers came out here to Kentlands and looked at what had been done here, and we got involved. As has been said, many people played a crucial role in creating this beautiful and livable community. The neighbors, the homeowners, the business operators, the builders, the bank, the city, all the city staff, they were all valuable contributors. Chevy Chase Bank became a key player in the ultimate execution of the community. The three most crucial players were Ed Boher, City of Gaithersburg, who were both willing to stretch and really hustle a schedule to get it done and do exciting and creative new things. Liz and Andres Duany, who created a beautiful and creative and elegant plan that we all love today. And Joe Alfandre, who envisioned something better than had been done before and risked everything, ultimately lost everything that he'd saved and built up until that time in his life. I have to say, everybody did a great thing and contributed a great deal. But in my mind, it was Joe who dreamed the initial dream, risked everything, fought to see it through. He was the one indispensable man in this community. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me. In a moment, I'm going to let Eileen know when I'm ready for that first image, and I've also asked her to let me know when I have about 3 minutes left, so I can make just a few concluding remarks. My name's Mike Watkins. I am the fourth generation of my family to be in transportation. My great-grandfather worked for the railroad. My grandfather was a bus driver. My dad was a deputy director for one of the transportation districts in the state of Ohio, and I design walkable communities. I was asked to speak about the past in Kentlands. Now, I'm an architect and a planner, and as you know, I live here, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the future of Kentlands and its continued potential. But I'm going to stick with the program of speaking about the past, and I think share with you some stories that that may have been forgotten or lesser known stories about Kentlands. So with that, if you would, Aileen, the first image. Great. Now, this is an article, if you can read the headline at the top, Gaithersburg annexes 928 acres, increases the size of the town nearly 50%. From the 1966 Gazette, when Mr. Kent had the property annexed. Steve's read ahead to the second headline, which reads, Marauders stuff head of deer into Otis Beale Kent's mailbox. It seems there's always an untold story or one that's been forgotten in Kentlands. So I'm going to do my best to race through as many of these as I can until Aileen cuts me off. But I'm counting on you, okay, to cut me off. Okay, next image. Some images from the charette. One of the ones we talked about on our tour today was an idea Douglas Duany had for the circle in front of the school. The original idea there was, of course, to have the circle intact and the traffic continue around the edge. What Douglas proposed was that the circle be landscaped with two types of maple trees. I forgot the other one this morning, the October Glory, and the one that turns red and the one that turns yellow in the fall, so that when the kids are going back to school, that circle is just lit up, beautiful in color. And I think that's an idea that straddles the past and the future, because I think that's one we could still implement. Okay, so file that one away. Next, please. A beautiful entrance for the school off of Route 28, drawn by Juan Caruncho down in the Miami office. So a different idea about the gatehouse and how a bus stop might be incorporated there. Next. DPZ didn't do the first plan for Kentlands. This is an earlier plan by RTKL that shows a somewhat different pattern, let's say, of development on the plan. Yeah, did someone suggest maybe the lights? Yeah. Is that, yeah. I'm the first with the, okay, so somebody's taking care of that. Great, thank you. Okay, next. Now, as well as thinking at the scale of community, the big picture, Joe Alfandre and his company was very interested in the details of how this would manifest itself. So at one point they had an extensive tree survey done, and Joe's came in and said, Mike, we want to make some adjustments to the plan to save some of these big trees. And one of them I pointed out on the tour was the tree that stands alone at the end of Ken Oaks Way that stood alone in the field at the time. Now you all live around it. It's about a quarter of a mile from the center of the neighborhood to the edge. Okay, on the left is a thought about how we might have saved a different oak tree in the middle of the circle by splitting the street and saving it at an island going into the circle. That idea didn't survive. We were able to save a tree in Old Farm in front of Bob Murray and Marty Murphy's house. Unfortunately, it was recently removed, but the space for the tree still remains. So another idea that straddles this, I think it would be a great memorial to the town founder or whoever you want to celebrate next, to replant a tree in that island. Next. Another tree that made it was one at the end of Massbury Street. There were a number of studies done how to save that particular tree. The reason for the interest in saving that one was because it marks the line between the field and the forest in Kentlands. If you go look at that tree, you'll notice all the limbs are growing in one direction toward the field. There are none on the other side because there are other trees standing there. So an interesting historic marker in the neighborhood. That one did make it. Next. Somebody on the tour pointed out today that the curb, I don't know if you've noticed, it's a few places in Kentlands have a sandblasted curb because we were experimenting even with the materials that might be used for the curb. Granite was proposed, that idea didn't make it, so we looked at sandblasting the concrete. And this is a fellow testing the finish on the concrete. Next. One of the very early images for the shopping center where, yes, I see some frowns out there. Nearest Kentlands, you see there would have been a gas station where Fleet Feet and that row of shops was located, as well as a fast food site with the drive-through and so forth. So we went through many iterations to get to where we are today. Next. And at that time, DPZ did this proposal, which was to say that the parking lot should be designed in the pattern of streets and blocks, and all the utilities run through the streets, so that leaving the blocks free for development in the future. And we showed this illustration of how it might infill over time, and explained to the Planning Commission why we thought this was important to require of the shopping center developer. And people in the audience laughed, you know. Interestingly, what happened when the shopping center was under construction, the city of Gaithersburg changed the minimum parking space width requirement in the city from 10 feet to 9 feet. So suddenly the shopping center had 10% of its parking lot area that was no longer needed for parking, which is why the space for the Blockbuster was added, the former Blockbuster, now Chick-fil-A. You notice it doesn't have the same arcade that the rest of the shopping center does, because it was added after the rest of the shopping center was approved, and the Cold Stone and the Chipotle across the way. So it's beginning to infill. Okay, we have a lot more work to do there, so we're straddling the past and hopefully the future there too. Next. A really cool idea, again, Juan Caruncha, working out of DPZ's Miami office, proposed this fabulous obelisk on the right that was to anchor the center of one of the parking blocks. It's actually the god of the marketplace, Hermes, on top of the obelisk. Instead, you may have noticed the obelisks we do have there. You've probably backed into them too. They surround the little cart corral. Yeah, we have a little more work that could be done there. Next. But I think the most interesting of the many schemes that were done for the retail area is this one done by Aldo Rossi, an Italian architect that Billy Winburn and Steve and others at Alfandre brought in to make a proposal for the shopping center. And, you know, these merchants are all about visibility, right? So what better form than an oval for a shopping center? So he completes the whole loop with retail, so you walk out of any store anywhere along the oval and you can see every other store. And his parting comment to Andres when he was dropping him off at the airport was, and no trees. He didn't want any trees blocking the signage, just a simple oval plaza with the merchants all around the edge. Next. Here's how that would have fit into the Kentlands plan in that same space where the shopping center is now. Next. More of the schemes were developed. One included bringing Coco Walk from Miami. This was an architect out of Baltimore that proposed this scheme. If you're familiar with that, a big U-shaped complex. This is the Midtown Charette that was held at City Hall. Some of you see yourselves in there. Dick Arkin, Bob Morey, Chip Burton with the developer. There's Liz leading the meeting, Tim Clark, Paige Lansdale with Great Seneca, Michelle Clark off to the side. So the community stayed very involved as the various options were developed for the place. Next. Details, there were plans and models. This one got pretty far. Next. Drawings like this, many of you are familiar with these because you remember them from the sales center. They were in the brochures. Beautiful drawings done at the Charette by Bill Dennis, who I think is out there somewhere. Was. There he is, yes. So Bill's the hand behind those drawings. Next. The houses we built are pretty close to what Bill drew. Unfortunately, the idea conceived by Charles Barrett for this pinwheel block wasn't built. This is the block of townhouses on the north side of the green where you, Tim and Michelle, used to live, and the block behind. Very clever way of orienting the same house in a pinwheel fashion to create an interesting streetscape. Unfortunately, that one wasn't built. We built something beautiful instead. Now, this is all, you know, you can't read this. This is all about mail delivery. This is like the next half dozen images are about mail delivery, because at some point in the neighborhood, they stopped delivering mail. I don't know if, yeah, some of you remember that. Yeah, the reason was because we explained to the post office that they couldn't put their mailboxes at the curb and deliver the mail because we have on-street parking. So unless you had postmen with really long arms, you know, that wasn't going to work. They said, well, then we'll put the mailboxes in the alley. We said, well, you know, that's not going to work either. And they said, we are the post office. This is what we do. We'll put the mailboxes in the alley. Do you remember the street, the Massbury, the curve in it that Mitchell and Best built, that first row of houses? Okay, that block, the homes within that block, because of its unusual shape, are addressed to 5 different streets. Try organizing the mail to deliver through the alley. So that clearly didn't work, and they stopped delivery of the mail. Now, you know, being outside Washington, D.C. does at times have its advantages. We have a higher than average ratio of federal government employees and lawyers. One of them, Dick Arkin, did something I never thought to do, which was to read the U.S. postal regulations on delivery. And I think one of Dick's greatest contributions to the neighborhood was finding the clause that said, if your average lot width is 50 feet or less in your neighborhood, we'll provide a mail carrier on foot. So you can thank Dick for the mail delivery that we have door to door. Yes. Next, please. But then there was a big discussion on how to get the post office delivered to this pattern. So we had to petition the neighbors in every block to agree to have a mailbox at the front door next. And then we had to have a series of community meetings about what the mailboxes would look like on the front of your houses. Now we did a code for an entire community in a week. And we spent, I don't know how many community meetings coming up with a list of, if your house is brick and has a wood porch, it'll have this kind of mail. Do you remember some of those? Do you remember that the first meeting, we spent the first half hour meeting each other? It was a new neighborhood, so we were getting to the refreshments were served, all that. Finally, we got down to business, and the first thing somebody said was, well, we should at least make sure we're not going to decide everything tonight. We should at least make sure we come up with a date for when we're going to meet again, okay? We managed to get that done, and then it was time for refreshments and more. Well, I'm not exaggerating. That's the only thing we accomplished at the first meeting. And I thought, well, I guess we're building a community here. You know, this is what it's about next. But there was drawing after drawing done of where in the block the mailboxes should go next. And again. Okay, now one tour stop we had on our tour this morning was that oval park at the end of Ken Oaks Way beside the lake. The early drawings for that show how the intention was to maintain the view at the end of Ken Oaks Way of the mansion in the distance. And somehow on both sides of the lake along that axis, we've clogged it up. You know, there needs to be a little bit of maintenance with the landscaping around that park. And then I think it may be a good idea to limb those trees up in front of the mansion and restore the view of the mansion with its reflection in the lake as you enter the community from Darnestown Road. So, you know, I know we've got a lot going on with 25 events and, you know, all of this, but someone might jump on that one. Okay, next. Okay, now this is one I think I need Jeff's help for. This is only the cover memo for the drawings of the tower that Gar Campbell designed to be placed at the entrance to Kentlands Boulevard. Now, if Jeff pretends to have forgotten, I'm sure it's because it was an enormous structure that would have cost a pretty penny to build. So I'm not sure if the drawings were inadvertently lost or what, but there's one missing idea that would take it's a little more involved than limbing up some trees. But it was a magnificent entrance to the neighborhood. If I find those drawings, maybe I'll find Karen or something. We'll get a little piece in the paper to share that one in that way. I don't remember that at all. Yeah, right. Same old Jeff. Next, please. This is what your clubhouse might have looked like. You laugh. It might have had it not been for Robert Orr, who's sitting across from Tim and Michelle, wave Robert, who designed the clubhouse that you have today. Next. Anyone remember the proposal for the flyover, the grade-separated interchange at Kentlands Boulevard and Great Seneca Highway? Yeah, well, yeah, Jeff does, I'm sure. Yes. Well, when I got had the meeting about that one, Sue Whalen, Steve, and others, and folks from the city saying, you know, this is the plan, they unroll the drawings. I'm on the phone with Andreas right away saying, there's this massive piece of infrastructure, you know, they're proposing. Is this the kind of entrance you imagine? And he says, get the photograph of the bridge in front of the Lincoln Memorial and tell them it's fine if it looks like that. You know, so I hang up and have my charge, you know, for the next week. Next, please. This is a retail study that Bob Gibbs did several years ago. Bob's in the back. You're going to hear from him shortly. He was very involved in some of the initial retail concepts. Not all of them were implemented. Something else we might, think about moving forward. Next, please. This is a proposal for a golf course and conference center on the Lakelands property. I'm not sure how widely this one was known, but I was in a meeting downtown recently, and the architect, when he found out I had something to do with Kentlands, came up to me and offered the images of the plan and the model and so forth. Next, please. This is a DPZ counter proposal for the barn that you have. The entrance to the barn right now, to the upstairs of the theater, is off the alley. A little hard to find. The building faces 3 streets, has really 3 different functions in it. And we thought it might have been cool to make the entrance to the theater upstairs face Firehouse Lane. Right now that entrance is just emergency only. And the idea was that there would be a cafe in the ground floor, then you'd have the stairs up, and since you go up the stairs on that back wall, you could exit the 2nd floor to a marquee that doubled as a balcony and advertise the theater performances out onto Firehouse Lane. And the idea went so far as to say that we could do special pavers between the barn and the firehouse and be able to close the street down so you have a performance and then everybody spills out and the cafe serves drinks and so forth. That might be a stretch to pull off at this point, but lots of things are possible. Next. Okay, this is another one. I was supposed to talk about the past, but and I am, but this was another idea that was proposed in the past that still could be realized. Do you see the building with the blue roof at the bottom? That's at the intersection of the road that goes across the dam where it hits Old Farm. That was originally to have been a restaurant so that everyone would have the opportunity to have a view of the lake, if only for an hour or 2 over a meal. So it's obviously not going to happen in that location because there's a home there now. Next slide. So other proposals were done. On the bottom right shows a proposal for that going across the street in land that's just lawn right now. So there's still a site left and some potential there if anyone really has some energy to burn. The slide on the top left shows the theater that was proposed for the lake. Next. And these are drawings of what that theater might have looked like. This was to have been a summer home for the National Symphony. Next. No one can forget the Walmart scheme across, yes. So we operated on 2 different fronts there. Some remember the drawing where I sent down the original design for the Walmart to the Miami office, and I actually don't remember who drew this scheme, but it's the most beautiful, elegant looking Walmart I've seen. At the same time, Andres says, I'm going to send you the name of this fellow who organizes community groups to fight Walmart. So on the left is the letter from this guy to me saying this is the services we provide. So we didn't know if it was going to happen or not. If it was happening, we wanted it to look better, but maybe we could do something altogether different. Next. Oh, on the tour this morning, we visited Booth Street, and when we understood that was going to be a single-loaded street with a retaining wall along the edge, Joe came in my office one day with the cover from the New Yorker that you see here and said, couldn't it look something like this? Couldn't we have a promenade with a little stone wall? And it looks very much like that. With the, except you guys don't wear fur coats when you walk your dogs. But next, please. You remember there used to be 3 silos next to the firehouse, right where the end of Hart Road is right now? The mayor really wanted to see those silo tops reused in some fashion. So here you see several different schemes. One with essentially logs with the silo top, a much more elegant scheme, one with the silo top on the ground, another being a very high-end gazebo, very elegant gazebo. And the location was to have been the traffic circle in Kentlands Boulevard, located there. And the description you can't read up there is me writing a note to Ed saying, it will be just like the Jefferson Memorial, the silo top. Next, please. Now, I think one of the most rewarding things for me personally has been to witness and participate in the community growing and taking shape in the neighborhood. And we have our share of characters in the neighborhood. Bobby the trash man, do you remember him? Yeah, for many years. Bobby was great. And he was one of those that pollinated community in the neighborhood. He would take in your trash and find out that, oh, you just had your baby, and then he'd pass that along to the next neighbor and so forth. And he became a bit of a fixture at kids' birthday parties. He was a celebrity to have it, like the first mail carrier, Mike, who it turns out was also a magician. It was really exciting for the kids to see Mike come up and deliver the mail, and then to be able to invite him to the birthday party. They were the coolest kids because they had Mike, the magician, come to their birthday party, somebody the kids are a celebrity within the neighborhood. So this business of the community, watching this community grow, and it hasn't been just me. I just stuck it out the longest. But there have been many people that worked in the DPZ office in Kentlands. Elizabeth Guyton was the second person to join me. Michael Frank was next. Steve M. Gorp, Jaime Torres Cruz, Colin Green, you're going to hear from later today. A number of the people that are still here worked with me when I was there. The photograph on the bottom, Mark Zonerich, whose uncle lived in the neighborhood, wound up getting a job here, Susie Lee, and Caroline Hagan, who's a close second runner to me. She started here and moved here in 1991 and started working for DPZ then. She still works for DPZ. And then if you visited our office, we enjoyed quite a long stretch with Zorro as the office dog, who's you see running the meeting here. So I'm doing okay time-wise. Yeah, speed it up, Jennifer's saying. Yeah, well, the good news is that's all the images. That's all the images I have. I just want to say three things in closing. The first is regards when I first started working for Andreas and Liz. Somebody said, was it you that said I didn't know what I was doing? Somebody said that. And it was true. I had been trained as an architect, educated as an architect, licensed, all that, to do buildings. But I really didn't know very much about building or designing communities. So when I first started working for them, I asked Andreas if there isn't something I could read. And some of you made comments about the Bible that I was carrying around today. This is Town Planning and Practice by Raymond Unwin, written in 1909. And Andreas said, find that book and read that. Now, this was before the internet. So I'm looking for a book first published, only at that time published in 1909. And I managed to track down a copy and read it. And when I reported back, I said, what's next? He said, read that book again. And it was pretty good advice. It's an excellent book. This copy, well, let me say one other thing, because there's a huge, I want to thank Andres and Liz. There's a huge debt that I can't repay for them allowing me the opportunity to work for them and shape not only this community but many. It shaped and fueled my passion and continues to inspire me. So thanks for that. This particular copy of the book was given to me by Joe Alfandre about a year ago. Some of you may have seen the video that he produced to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the charette, and on one of his visits when he was making that video, he dropped off his copy of that book. So I keep it on my desk to further inspire me. But I think, why are you taking pictures now? What's that? Oh, the book, sorry, okay, great, all right. But I think, all this business of touring and showing pictures and so forth of the community, I think the greatest evidence we have that the community of Kentlands is a success is you all. This event, this weekend, I think is phenomenal. Absolutely, all put on by volunteers who are also passionate about community. So thanks for that. Thanks for including me as one of your neighbors. Thanks.
I think you can see the passion that went into the design of Kentlands because is that better? Mike's passion that he showed today was also his passion in the design of Kentlands, and it was a factor, as well as the passion of the city, other DPZ people, and the few residents of Kentlands that were here in 1991. It was it was something that we always had in the back of our mind, and we always wanted to try to honor. What I thought I'd do today, and I want to thank Steve for his gracious comments, for which I did not pay for or even ask for, but it was thank you. I thought I would talk about some of the challenges that we had in those first 2 or 3 years to fulfill that passion. And do I have any time left? Can you give me 2 or 3 minutes tell me when I'm... So, in 1988, Chevy Chase Bank made a loan to the Joseph Alfandre Company and for the acquisition of the land and the development of Kentlands. The approvals were received somewhere in 1999, I guess, and construction started. Houses were under construction. They were settling into 2000, and then the excesses of the 1980, I'm a decade ahead. In 1988, we made the loan. 1999, they got the approvals. 1988, we made the loan. 1989, they got the approvals. And then in 2000, things were well underway. I mean, in 1990, things were well underway. But the excesses of the 1980s came back to haunt everybody in the end of 1990. And we had a massive real estate crash. And the Alfandre Company wasn't the only company that had ran out of liquidity. Bad loans were piling up at banks. Regulators were exercising their muscles. New regulations came into effect, caused a credit squeeze. Banks' lending limits were reduced. Banks couldn't honor their commitments to make loans, and Kentlands got caught in the middle. And so in June 1991, the Great Seneca Development Corporation, a subsidiary of Chevy Chase Bank, took over the Kentlands. And we recognized we had all of this hard work that went into a plan. We recognized that there was a lot of passion about it. We recognized that the residents who were here were diehard converts to new urbanism. There weren't many of them. There were only about 100 houses at the time, but and we had to deal with that. On the other hand, on the other side of the ledger, we had to deal with the fact that Chevy Chase Bank had some other bad real estate loans. It was under a supervisory agreement with the Office of Thrift Supervision, and which meant as we moved forward with these we had several other large development communities that we had financed in Virginia. As we moved forward with these communities, we had to prepare business plans for the regulators, report quarterly. They were subject to annual review, annual renewal. So at any given time, I could have had the rug pulled out from under me, so to speak. So we are sitting there in the summer of 1991 doing an inventory of the position we were in. And we were dealing here with a relatively new and untested urban design, or community design, particularly in the mid-Atlantic states. There had been some, Seaside was moving, but Seaside was happy if they did, I think, 25 or 30 houses. I think Bob Davis told me once. And as we researched our market, we found that while the planners might be right, that the American public was ready for a new concept in terms of communities, we couldn't find them. And the people that were coming in, of the traffic that had been coming into Kentlands, it was a vast majority walked right back out again. And the issues were the size of the small lots, and the new urbanism design actually scared them to some degree because it was new, it was uncertain. They didn't know what it was going to end up being. And we learned this information through focus groups as well and through interactions at the visitor center. And that while there were a core of early adopters like the Morey family, it strikes me he was here in 1991, some of the rest of you were as well, but there weren't enough of you. And what we were attracting, ironically, you've got Rachel Carson Elementary School now with 8 portables, 9 portables, going on to 10 or 11, 12, I don't know how many, but we were not attracting families. We were becoming a community of dinks, which if you remember that acronym was dual income, no kids. And I didn't think that was very healthy over the long run. So those were our challenges. One, we had to increase traffic. Two, we had to figure out how to broaden the market. And at the same time, we had no builders, really. I mean, Mitchell and Best and Rocky Gorge were wounded by the recession, but they were still building. And so we had two active builders. Joe Alfandre had to stop building. We solicited the large builders to participate. We were turned down by all but one, the D.R. Horton Company, which did provide us some real stability for the short run. They were in the community maybe a year and a half, and then the frustration of dealing with the then city approval process discouraged them from continuing. But we stepped back, we said, okay, we've got to attract builders. We hired Joe Alfandre as a consultant for a year. That gave us some continuity. That gave us a builder to continue. We put together an internal team to actually do the development. People with professional experience in the development business, in the marketing of communities. And we got that business plan approved by the regulators. Then we decided we needed to reach out and find more builders. So we came up with a creative plan. We called it our custom builder program. We would find small builders, most of whom had worked for larger firms but had lost their jobs because of the decline in home building. At least two of them came from Ryan, which is a good builder, not the kind of houses you probably want in Kentlands, but they're a good builder. And we said, you guys come into Kentlands. We'll let you build on our lots. We won't charge you anything up front. We'll provide you a construction loan to construct the house. We'll provide a mortgage loan to the purchaser. And when the house is finished, we'll take a piece of your profit to pay for the land and to pay for our risk. And so Joe Alfandre rekeyed back up, retooled back up, and then Churchill, I forgot their, Eric Tovar and my Reed Tovar came in. The Stonewall guys came in. I don't know if you built under that initially, Steve, or you were later then, but.
I didn't get that good a deal.
Yeah, well, we were stable then. And I think there's one other builder I can't remember the name of, but, and that created some activity in the market. So the longer a project sits dead and dormant, the harder it is to resuscitate it. I mean, it's kind of like a heart attack victim, right? The longer your heart stops beating, the harder it's going to be to bring it back together. Then we addressed the marketing program. So we had a concept, we had a new urbanist concept that didn't seem to be selling. We started running full-page color ads in the Washington Post every Saturday. That was $12,500 a pop. I remember that. Mike knows I watch my numbers. We provided incentives for brokers. We provided premiums and trinkets for people who came in. And we still were getting 30% of the traffic interested, 70% of the traffic just turning around, going right back out again. So I decided we needed to create something here that showed that this community was going to have permanence. So Mike got Robert Orr to design a recreation center. That was heresy in the Planned Community Developers Handbook to build a recreation center early in a project. It was at that time the norm was to build it toward the end. So and I wanted it to stand out. I wanted it to be different than any other community that was in the Montgomery County area that might be considered competitive. I wanted two pools, one for the families, one for adults. The family pool had to have a beach entry so that the world could know we were looking for kids. I wanted a volleyball pit. That didn't last too long after the HOA got involved, but that's fine. But it sold. People said, oh, wow, wanted basketball courts. That almost didn't work out because we almost had a shooting on the court because we didn't lock the gates at the time, and some big kids came in from I don't know where, and one kid pulled a gun on the other one, and so then we started putting locks on the gates. And of course, we had the tennis courts. And I wanted a very nice clubhouse. I wanted a relatively good-sized clubhouse. In retrospect, maybe it's a little smaller, but I got to tell you, in the mid-1990s or 1993, 94, when we built it, that was a big clubhouse compared to the competition. Nobody had a two-story clubhouse. And and I also wanted a fitness room. I know it's too small down there now, but it looked good at the time. And then we started to change our advertisement away from new urbanism. Sorry, Liz, if you're still here, but we started emphasizing more lifestyle. And then I came up with the idea. We had 16 lots on Lake Inspiration, so we ran an ad that said lakefront lots in Kentlands. It was more sophisticated than that, but that was the message. Full color. I sent out a professional photographer. It was a beautiful picture. I still have it at the house, framed. And those houses sold out in 90 minutes. My staff in the barn, in the visitor center, were almost shot after those first 90 minutes. But they did an excellent job of calming people down and being able, because the traffic count coming through was just huge. And they did an excellent job of calming people down and getting them to listen to the message. And we converted more people that weekend than we did in any other weekend, and it kind of got us a little bit over the hump. And we did sell the 16 lots too, so that didn't hurt, but we got it a little bit over the hump. And then we started doing things to be a little different as people came into the community. Most of them were small, but for one, we came up with the idea of having the first Oktoberfest in Kentlands. And the primary motivation was marketing, but we opened it up to the community as well, both as a community relations situation, but maybe people who were coming in looking for a house would mix with people who lived here. It was pretty darn successful, so we did it the second year. And then it got to be a little more expensive, and I was going to stop, and my representative to the HOA board said, the community really wants to keep it. I said, well, fine, let the HOA run it. We were still then covering 65% of the cost of the HOA because it was based upon number of lots sold. So I was still subsidizing it, but I could put it in a different budget. I wasn't having as much trouble with the regulators and somebody else worrying about what I'm spending on marketing. So I would say about 1990, the end of 1993 to 94, I thought the residential piece was stabilized. I thought most of our challenges were over. And we had started to turn our attention to the commercial section. We knew, we were comfortable early on that the residential piece would work. We just had to find a way to create the market. We were convinced that the commercial concepts were 7 to 10 years from fruition, if then. We were in a recession. The design of the mall was nice, but it just wasn't going to fly in the market. And the only thing that we could gin some interest up on was basically a strip shopping center. So the challenge became, given the context of all of the design work that was being done, given the context that I knew this would be a big disappointment to the city and to DPZ, how do we work with them to make it palatable to them? Because I thought it was critical to the continued survival of Kentlands to have some commercial. If you had the commercial, you had the rec center in place, you had houses going up, this thing was going to make it. And so that's what we did. We worked very hard. Ed Boher ironically, Ed Boher figured out that if Kentlands failed, he was going to go into the Resolution Trust Corporation. And the last thing he wanted to do was to have to deal with the federal government with Kentlands. He's the only person that really understood the pressures that we had, and so we sort of worked together on worked together on making something work, not ideal, but make it work. And I will forever thank Andres for coming along and coming on board and making it as good as he can. I knew we were over the hump then, and then about 1997, we had a second small charette to do Midtown that Mike was referencing. I thought some of those ideas were very good, and my memory's bad. I don't remember how we lost some of those ideas.
Some were good.
Pardon?
Some of them were good.
Yeah.
But, you needed the developer to get it built.
I couldn't find another developer, but I thought Beatty was going to do the Cocoa Walk thing. And I don't know why that, I still don't remember why that failed. But, you know, I was expecting a little bigger things for Marketplace. But I will say one thing about Marketplace. While Kentlands Square generated retail and generated health for the community, it's not very walkable. Market Square, at least, is more walkable. It's attached to the community. It's attached to Lakelands. It could bring people together. And while it might not be the most attractive town center, and maybe it's not even a town center, but it is a gathering place, and that's one of the principles. And so it's an imperfect gathering place, but you know, there's a lot of potential there in that commercial area. There's a lot of interest now, of course, and there would be even more interest among developers doing it because it's now becoming mainstream to redevelop that kind of property, to do mixed use. What will hold it back is your adequate public facilities problems here with the school and the lack of growth, frankly, in Montgomery County, because I find the state in Montgomery County, this is my political speech, anti-business. But so to summarize, I kind of look at Kentlands as two major components. I think that the residential piece came out great. I think that we have a vibrant community here. I have 2 adult children who live here. I hear a lot of positive things when I talk to their neighbors and other people that I meet in Kentlands, and positive things when I talk to Michelle and the rest of you here that I've known for more years than I want to know. Oh, not that old? You're not that old? Oh, I guess I got older than you. Oh, he is. But, you know, 25 years is a long time ago, and some of you people I've known for that long, but, or at least 20. But I see this as a vibrant, happy place to be. And the kids who can walk to school, if they don't walk to school, it's a quick ride. My 8-year-old, you know, in the old days, my mother would have put me outside and said walk, but today, I guess you can't do that. But so I think that we've done we honored the concept for the residential, and I hope you feel comfortable with that statement, Mike. I view the commercial as a first cut, and I've already said there is a lot of potential there, and so that's up to the city of Gaithersburg, and I don't think they'll have, unlike 20 years ago, I don't think they'll have any trouble finding developers. I know the Saw Company is willing to work on a plan, get something approved, but Sidney, you know more of the APFO problems and the county's problems than I do, and so if you get on the council, maybe you can fix all that, but you know, it's just, that's going to be the hang-up. And I think the market's there. The market will be there for a gradual absorption. But I think the most important point to me is we're here 25 years later. If you had asked me in 1992 whether this community would be here, I would have told you I'm not even sure I'll have a job in another 2 months, because you can't believe all the trees and logs that were falling in the banking industry. And it was it was a difficult time. There was a lot of stress and some heated discussions, and to the degree that I offended people, I apologize, but you know, I also had to worry about going back to the regulators and telling them, well, we're going to be over budget here. You guys have got to hang in there with us, because we were convinced the best way to dig ourselves out of the hole was to build the real estate. And it worked. We got back a lot of money. We didn't get it all back, but we got back a lot of money. And so, I mean, I think Joe had a terrific concept. It just was coming out of the ground at the wrong time. And it's unfortunate that he couldn't finish it. But so that's my thoughts.